Yes, so now it's official. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy you joined. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anna Koens, and I'm Impact and Outreach Manager for the Earth Investigations Program at Journalism Fund Europe. Journalism Fund is dedicated to advancing independent and investigative journalism across Europe that serves the public interest. And Journalism Fund has been doing it already for more than a quarter of a century, supporting in-depth coverage of important societal issues, critical thinking, transparency, and contributing to the well-informed debate, including on environmental issues. In 2021, Journalism Fund launched the Earth Investigations Program with the support of the Arcadia Fund. We have two grant programs for environmental journalism, one for cross-border teams of journalists, which is meant to support investigation of environmental affairs, and I'm happy that some of you use those grants. And another program is for organizations that want to develop training and capacity building programs. But also as a part of the Earth program, we host training sessions and webinars such as this one today, and they are made accessible to the environmental journalism community. So today we're going to talk about investigating an important issue some of you have already are looking into, the European Pesticides Export. And already in 2020, the European Commission committed to ensure that such hazardous chemicals that have been banned within the EU should not be produced for export, and relevant legislation should be amended. However, as of last year's improvements and programs, not much legal action was included to stop this practice, and essentially double standards continue. So I will let our guests further explain more in detail why this happened and what will be happening further with this initiative, and they will share some interesting insights with you. Our speakers today are Hans van Scharen and Joao Camargo from Corporate Europe Observatory, which is a research and campaign group working to expose and challenge the privileged access and influence enjoyed by corporations and their lobby groups in EU policymaking. Corporate Europe Observatory has investigated corporate lobby groups and their tactics already for 26 years. So you see, we're at the same age with Journalism Fund, always fighting for democracy. Hans and Joao are both food and agriculture researchers and campaigners. Hans has also been working for 15 years already as a journalist, has experience working in the European Parliament, and he's focusing a lot on agriculture and food policy related issues, specifically like pesticides, and Joao is also a climate researcher. So I give the word to Hans now.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks, Anna. Thanks to EU Journalism Fund for hosting this webinar. It's indeed a very important and critical topic that we're discussing today. We are a CEO part of a coalition, the Ban Export Coalition, with other NGOs like Pesticide Action Network, Public Eye, ECHO, and several others. And that coalition basically has also created an international coalition with NGOs from all over the world. I'm saying this because I'm giving an overview a bit later about what has happened so far. That's why I'm saying this. I just want to indicate that the nature of this webinar is a bit special because we sort of consider it as embargoed in a way, and that is because my colleague Joao will later already highlight the main findings and contents of two reports, civil society reports that will be published in a few weeks' time. And one report is published by CEO, the other one is published by the coalition that I just mentioned. And the occasion of the publication of these reports is the Belgian presidency of the European Union. The 23rd of April, the Belgian presidency will host a conference on topics regarding chemical regulation and also this issue. And as you might know, Belgium is one of the few member states that has taken the initiative to launch national legislation on the exports of highly toxic pesticides. And if you want, you can just send us an email to receive an advanced copy of those reports, those embargoed reports. So voila. I will hand over to my colleague who will give you some insights in the nature and size of the problem that we're discussing. This is basically the report that is ordered by this coalition of NGOs almost a year ago. We started working on it, and it has been written largely by a French consultancy NGO called Le Basique. And yeah, I hand over to Joao to give you some highlights and some insights in these findings.
Thank you. And thank you also for the invitation to EU Journalism Fund and for all of you for attending. Anna, I need share privileges. Just so it's not only me speaking. So basically, this report is now scheduled to be, this report that Hans was introducing is scheduled to be published on the 17th, 1 week before the Belgian presidency event on the future of chemicals, which is a very difficult to get in event at this moment. The report tackles one of the arguments that was raised against the idea of an export ban, which is that it would have a very high impact in terms of economic losses and job losses were it to be implemented. Yet it gives a bigger overview than this. And I also would like to share this overview with you. The global sales of pesticides at the world level are very high. It's a market that moves 2.8 million tons a year. And the EU is the #1 exporting region by far. We're exporting 714,000 tons, which corresponds to 6.6 billion euros. These numbers are not very easy to get. That's one of the key works done by Le Basique, is to find a methodology to be able to scrutinize with very unclear numbers provided both by companies and by regulators on the volumes that are comprised in this trade. In terms of the banned chemicals, which are the ones who would be affected by this ban, just 7 countries are responsible for 92% of the total volume. And these are France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and Hungary. And they accounted in 2018 to 5% of their overall pesticides volume and 2% in 2019. So it's a very small part of their general trade. And it's not the same in every country. As you can see here, the countries that produce and export the most banned chemicals are Belgium and Netherlands, although in terms of volume, Germany is also quite relevant in this. And some of these products are neonicotinoids, which have been banned in the EU. And here you can see some image of where they exported to. So to a lot of countries. Of course, this is a different map for each of the specific products, but neonics that the industry fought and is still fighting to keep on producing and keep on selling. They even challenged the EU decision by going to the European Court of Justice to keep it being used in the EU. Yet it's getting sent all around the world. And as probably Hans will tell you later, this all comes back to the EU under the form of residues in other products which the EU imports without checking its composition. In terms of total exports, there was a change. I talked previously about 2018 and 2019. There was an increase in the production of these banned products. The most significant one was in France, and this is right before the introduction of their ban, but it increased in Germany and in Belgium. In Belgium, it increased threefold from 2018 to 2019. And we are talking about countries which talk internally, and that there's internal proposals, national proposals, to actually ban these products. In terms of the impact associated to these products, in 2022, for Germany, it comprised 4.5% of total turnover. And in Belgium, it's the case most relevant case, 9% of total turnover of pesticides sold. That is, and the others are all lower. In terms of the impacts on jobs, the agricultural sector for pesticide production in the EU was 15,700 jobs in 2018. In those 7 key countries producing the most EU pesticides, these numbers are 12,400. So these, in terms of Germany and Belgium, it's 1.9% and 1.2%. Yet we're talking about general pesticide jobs. When we decompose them, these are stats from CropLife, so an organization which represents a lot of these agribusiness companies. 42% of the jobs are production and logistics, 25% sales, 21% R&D, and the rest in other areas of the country, like human resources accounting of the company, sorry. So the estimates for complete job losses, if there were to be an EU export ban in these 7 countries, would be very low. It would comprise 133 jobs in 2018. These obviously are connected to the volume produced of banned pesticides. It would comprise 213 jobs in 2021 and 173 jobs in 2022. This is for 7 countries, which comprise millions and millions of people. And even inside the agricultural sector, it would be absolutely meaningless. And we have a case which we can actually point out as it has already been done, although not overall ban, but the ban in France led to the loss of 12 temporary contracts and no permanent jobs. So this is, so probably the numbers we have told are conservative by our very method of calculation. The likelihood of very low job loss is very big. Also, in terms of the profits of these companies, they are all in an upward trend in terms of profit. They have very large profit margins. They would be more than enough to financially absorb this little reduction in terms of the volume of EU banned products that they're still selling, these old molecules, these cheap products, which they just keep pushing on because, well, maybe Hans can explain a bit better the whole story from now forward. Just some pictures to illustrate the rest. These are for all of the banned products, and the countries which import the most banned products are Mexico, El Salvador, Peru, and Sudan. There's also a large volume in terms of bulk to Brazil. Yeah, these are some of the key products which we are talking about. On the right, it's the neonicotinoids. And there's also the example of the paraquat ban, which is a ban that explained how, well, it was very slow, but it explained, and most of the arguments raised against an EU ban can be explained by the success of the paraquat, because it actually led to these damageful products stop being produced and being successively banned in different regions until it's finally basically a banned product altogether. Okay, Hans, I pass on to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joao. Yeah, just to reflect on the paraquat example. I mean, as you said, Joao, indeed there was some success. However, this is a very toxic substance that was produced. I think it was first in the 60s, and very soon after, there were countries that were already banning it. European countries as well, already in the 80s. But the European ban only came into effect in 2007. And then very gradually after that, there were countries in the global south starting banning it. However, you know, as you might be aware, there is the famous court cases ongoing in the US concerning glyphosate. But less known is the paraquat court cases after the so-called paraquat papers were published, meaning internal documents showing how the main producer of paraquats, Syngenta, based in Switzerland, basically denied its own internal scientists alarming findings on the harmful effects of paraquat. And so basically, thanks to this sort of corporate cover-up by Syngenta in this case, this allowed the product to be sold and traded for much more years than scientifically and human health wise was should be authorized. I wanted to say, if people have questions already now, we have a moment for Q&A at the end of this session, obviously, but we thought it would be nice if people already have questions now. Then you're very welcome to ask them now. You can, well, the best would be to ask your questions by unmuting yourself, or if you are not able to ask the question because you're in an office with colleagues, then you can of course also use the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to come in now. It can also be a remark.
Yeah, Zoe is asking a question.
Okay.
Yes, thanks for that. I'm just wondering what your perception of the Commission is. I mean, I worked for Envy on food safety and maximum residue levels, pesticides, and the re-importation of banned pesticides. And the position in the Parliament is the MEPs know full well, the possibility of this sort of deadly poisonous boomerang coming back, being re-imported onto consumers' plates within the EU. And I know neonicotinoids are supposed to be banned in the EU, and imidacloprid is one that comes to mind in particular. I drafted a report which was adopted by the plenary session to try and ban the use of imidacloprid in salmon farming. We were incredibly concerned because Bayer, who invented the substance, had labelled it as very toxic, particularly when used in water, and should never be used in water. So to use it in salmon farming in particular, and then we found about a year after the report was adopted, which the Commission paid absolutely no attention to, They don't seem to take on board independent scientific studies, and I don't think the European Chemicals Agency has the funding to really look at the sort of cumulative and cocktail effects of all these re-imported pesticides, as well as the pesticides that are allowed to be used, which is actually quite a scary prospect. So I'm just wondering what your perception of DG Agri in the Commission is, because my feeling is that they're too open to manipulation by farmers, big money, Copa Cogeca. So I just wanted to hear your sort of view on that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Zoe, for that question. Well, there's actually a lot of questions and a lot of content in your question. I'm going to do a very short overview of what happened in this file so far. So I hope that some of your questions will be answered in that presentation that I will do in a few minutes. But in general, yes, I mean, CEO, as you might know, as an organization, has been documenting and showing with often based on access to information requests and the thousands of documents that sometimes generates, and has been showing via those publications how indeed the pesticide industry has been very successful in manipulating the debate, the political debate, the policy debate. One of the ways of doing that is indeed, as I just mentioned also in the Paraquat case, manipulating science. The whole glyphosate case, the neonic examples are full of very concrete and real examples where science has been bought or been manipulated to convince policymakers not to take action or to delay action or to weaken action. My colleague Nina Holland, has published in the past reports, for example, on the specific issue that you mentioned, Zoe, on the residues in important foods. So the issue of the maximum residue levels, the MRLs, and how also on in that aspect there has been a lot of fighting back. I think in general, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. Very pragmatic level is to say, for European politicians, this MRL and residues problem, having a lot of residues from in foodstuffs being important from countries like Brazil or Mexico or the United States, that is a very important issue because it directly impacts the health of their voters and of the citizens in Europe. However, I personally, I mean, that is obviously a super important aspect, but I also think that the European Union, the fact that the European Union has won the the Nobel Peace Prize, I think it's around 10 years ago. The fact that the European Union is signatory to a lot of international conventions on human rights, obviously the impact of what we're discussing here, as you might know, is primarily for people in the global South, and I will talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. But I think the double standards element of this file, and the fact that the European Union is looking away from export and trade practices that are clearly violating human rights, I think for me that is at least as big as of an issue as the residue issue and the impacting of human health. But of course, we are living in times where, thanks to the farmers' protests, which are fueled by Copa Cogeca and their national entities and various chemical lobbies, it's amazing as we speak how fast the little progress that the European Union has made in protecting ecosystems, in protecting human health, and how quickly these initiatives, sometimes it's already law, like for example, the very few environmental protecting aspects of the common agricultural policy. There was some progress made, but it's being rolled back now, thanks to the tractors rolling into capitals all over Europe, and the heavy lobbying by the agro business. That is one element. So those achieved, let's say, legislation is being rolled back, but also, and maybe even more importantly, as you might know, the farm to fork and the chemical elements of the Green Deal have never really seen the day of light. They have been made. There was a lot of progress made, but before they could even be, agreed upon, they already brushed off the table, as happened, as you know, with the sewer, the pesticide reduction law, and as we speak, might be happening also to the nature restoration law, where we see the incredible, unprecedented behavior of the Belgian presidency, basically lobbying. Let's say the prime minister or the liberals in the Belgian government are lobbying for other member states to vote against. And this all is in the context of a very powerful agribusiness sector, very powerful chemical sector, that is not pleased with was not pleased with the announcement under the Green Deal. And I don't know if that answers a bit your question, but this is part of the issue, the reality that we're in. Then I see a question from Christine on the compilation of figures on economical and employment impacts. Well, as you have seen in the presentation of Joao, there's several data sets that have been used. There is the Eurostat database. There is the other databases that have been used, and it's well, I won't go into the details, but it's explained very clearly in the report how we come to these figures. I just want to clarify very, very clearly that although the figures show that the impact on employment in the chemical sector in Europe of an export ban would be very limited, differently than the chemical sector has been suggesting. They always, the typical lobby argument to policymakers and politicians who need to be re-elected is, well, if you go push through this kind of legislation, it will harm our competitiveness in this global market, and so you better not do this because it will cost jobs, and that would be very bad for your political reputation. So we show that this argument is basically, when it comes to these banned pesticides, it's not true. However, you should not make the mistake of thinking, because that's how you could twist the argument, that, well, it's a very limited economical impact. It's a very limited section of the total chemical activity in the total production of chemicals and pesticides in Europe. Nevertheless, the impacts, as I have already mentioned earlier, the impacts on people in the global south is huge. And there's many, many, many reports and documentations on that, whether it's in Africa, Latin America, or Asia. The impacts are huge. I'm just quickly going to see if there's more questions now. Otherwise, I would like to continue. Yeah, Nina has indeed posted a link to the lobbying on the, as I mentioned, to the MRL legislation. Seems like the substantial work has been done in this respect. As journalists, what are the other unique angles to look out for in reporting ban on in the global south? Yeah, I will try to answer that question during the overview. Well, again, I'm going to give you a very, very quick, brief bird's eye overview of what happened so far. Some key dates, moments in the from the past years. I would like to start with the 9th of July 2020, when several UN rapporteurs on human rights published a report, and the title of their press release at the time was "States Must Stop Exporting Unwanted Toxic Chemicals to Poorer Countries." This is a very interesting report. You can find it very easily on the net. It's co-signed by 35 UN rapporteurs, gives a lot of already a lot of detail, a lot of context. But there's one element that is often forgotten and which struck me when I first read it, and that is the racialized nature of these exports cannot be ignored. And I quote the UN rapporteurs. The fact that the famous double standards, that Europe on the one hand says these pesticides are too dangerous to be used here in Europe, but apparently it's okay to export them to all corners of the world, where often people of color and people in poor conditions have to work with these products, often have no access to protective gear. Well, often the climate also doesn't allow basically to wear protective gear while using these highly toxic pesticides. Another figure that is very important is that the UN rapporteurs say that pesticide poisoning killings are plus 200,000 people a year, which is quite a staggering figure. 200,000 people a year lose their life because of these products. So that was July 2020. Then a very important publication was in September 2020 by our colleagues. Joao also mentioned them already. Publication in September 2020 by Public Eye and Unearthed. And for the very first time, they basically also gave a sort of overview or an assessment of the amount. So it was 80, the figures were already mentioned, the 81,000 tons of 31 banned chemicals. These organizations basically assembled those figures via a freedom of information request to ECHA, the European Chemical Agency. There is countries that want to export banned pesticides. They need to send export notifications to ECHA, and this is, well, it gives some insights, but it's still very general and general figures. They have to notify which substance, which properties of this substance, which precautions the importing country should take, the intended use, and lastly the quantities. One important fact of this report by Public Eye and Unearthed was that 75% of all exports go to low and middle income countries. So again, it's not only exporting to big agricultural nations like the US, where, well, some would argue at least there is some governance structure, in how these products can be sold and used. I sometimes have my doubts when I follow the pesticide debate in the US, but okay. But the truth of the matter is that in a lot of countries in the global south, there is indeed often very poor or no regulations. There is very poor or low precaution requirements for agricultural companies or agricultural workers in how to use these substances. So that's September 2020. October 2020, very important moment, is when the European Commission published, as part of the Green Deal, the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability Towards a Toxic-Free Environment. You will probably be aware of this very hopeful signal this was. The phrase that the European Commission used was very interesting. I will quote: "The EU will lead by example and, in line with international commitments, ensure that hazardous chemicals banned in the European Union are not produced for export, including by amending relevant legislation if and as needed." So that is quite a very hopeful message from the European Commission indeed. We now know that unfortunately it didn't turn out that well. So we are October 2020. in let me look. Yeah, March 2021, a very important moment, also less known, but there was actually an endorsement by the European Council. So the member states expressly welcomed this announcement by the European Commission, and in the meantime also the European Commission had confirmed that they will propose a legislative proposal in 2023, last year. A bit further on in 2021, there was an important letter by more than 70 MEPs, basically urging the European Commission to not slow down and speed up. And then in a year passed, not much happened, which basically started alarming us and many of our civil society colleagues, which is why we started working on this coalition, a small European coalition, and then a larger international coalition. This basically led to the publication of a joint statement, which you can find all over the web, signed by over 326 civil society organizations and trade unions. And we published that in December 2022. At the same moment, ECHO had also launched a petition, which was in the end, I think, signed by around 230,000 European citizens, basically all asking the European Commission, please put this into action, the export ban legal proposal that you announced. At that moment, maybe a little anecdotal story is that we as coalition visited the European Commissioner Sinkevicius, who was officially in charge of this file. So we met him in December 2022. We all started ranting about the incredible the harming of human rights and the double standards of the EU. And after all our exposés of the, I think, 6 or 7 NGOs present, Mr. Sinkovic very calmly said, well, thank you very much for your presentations. I completely agree with you, but I think you're sitting in the wrong office. You should be addressing the office of Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. You should be addressing the VCI, which is the German chemical industry lobby organization, and so forth. And then he went on explaining that, unfortunately, since the announcement in 2020, things had changed dramatically. And he mentioned the COVID pandemic and especially the start of the Ukraine war. And he was very honest and explained that the political dynamics on these kind of files and everything, pesticides and food production and so forth, had been really changing. You might be aware, I remember the fact that a few days after Putin invaded Ukraine, the first signals of chemical lobbies echoed very quickly also by the politicians of the European People's Party, so the Christian Democrat group, basically calling for a moratorium on any new Green Deal initiatives, farm to fork initiatives. And this basically started very fast after the invasion in Ukraine and got only louder and louder, which then basically resulted in what I mentioned earlier, for example, the deleting of the pesticide reduction law. So I'm gonna speed up a bit. So that was December 2022. Then, yeah, we basically, as NGOs were in contact with the Commission, we were more and more worried about, that nothing was happened. And then basically in early 23, so early last year, we were assured by the European Commission officials that no, we should not be worried. They were going ahead and that they would soon be launching a public consultation and an impact assessment. And those familiar with European legislation, those are usual steps. So the public consultation was launched in May last year, lasted until the end of July. resulted in quite a number of replies, both from citizens, NGOs, and corporate voices, so corporate lobbies. At the same time, there was a consultancy charged with doing an impact assessment, and this impact assessment obviously is also part of the usual standard procedure, where it not be that most people don't know that the impact assessment is especially important to convince the beast called the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, which is a small body of experts that basically need to review every new legislation, and they will primarily look at if this new legislation is not at odds with the internal market rules, if it's not harming European competitiveness, if it's not leading to much job losses, etc. This is why we decided to launch also this study on the economical impacts that Joao just shared some highlights of. So we shared a very early draft with the Commission, and we had interviews with the consultants. So we were sort of optimistic that the impact assessment would be ready, as we were told, in September, October last year. And then came together with the increasing pressure from the chemical industry, agrochemical lobbies, let's say the State of the Union speech by Ursula von der Leyen in September last year was the first very clear indication that, and the departure of Frans Timmermans, who was one of the strong political defenders of the farm to fork strategy and the SUR, etc. He left to Holland to participate in the elections, as you know. So all those elements played a role into the slowly sidelining of this very optimistic initiative announced in 2020. And then in October 23, it was very clear that the proposal that was announced for 23 was no longer on the EC, the European Commission's work program. So yeah, we were really alarmed. We again reached out to the Commission via official letters and via informal contacts. We were still assured, well, no, we're still working on it. Okay, the impact assessment and the has had a bit of a delay, but we're still working on it. And then via informal contacts in December last year, we basically got confirmation from officials that there would be no longer a legislative proposal during the mandate of this European Commission. So that's when we knew basically the thing was dead. However, as we speak now, they still work on the impact assessment. They still work on various proposals. And the worrying thing for us is that, well, not only that they basically have not fulfilled their own promises, but the worrying thing is also that it seems that they are working more on a proposals that are destined to the international approach, meaning we have to work via the Rotterdam Convention and the so-called PIC regulation, which is the Europeans' law since 2012, a sort of implementation of this international agreement, which is there to basically govern on an international level the trade and shipping and exports of hazardous chemicals. Why is that very worrying? Well, to cut a long story short, this will be part of the content of another report that CEO will be publishing in a few weeks' time, is because if you analyze the contributions of the chemical sector in this public consultation of last summer, basically they all very strongly argue, well, this is a global problem, this is an international problem, at least they recognize there is a problem, which is already something. But we need to address this global problem via an international approach and via a global approach, meaning Rotterdam Convention, strengthening this, blah, blah, blah. I'm very worried because, well, I don't want to go too much into detail now, but it's very clear, and also UN rapporteurs have reported on this, that although international conventions and although the Rotterdam Convention is important, we will never deny that, but there is a sort of paralysis of this instrument because, for example, to put new hazardous substances on Annex 5 lists, which basically restricts very much and conditions very much exports of certain toxic products, well, it has to be decided by a unanimity. It has to be unanimous. Sorry, meaning that it suffices one party to the Rotterdam Convention to say no, 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 we don't want this product to be on that list, and so it doesn't happen. So again, I think I should stop here and maybe Joao, I don't know if you want to add things to what I said, but yeah, to summarize, unfortunately, it seems that the very powerful agrochemical lobbies have won yet again. There will be, by the way, another webinar in May by two of my colleagues at CEO, Vicky Kahn and Nina Holland, on which will go much more in detail on how this chemical lobby functions and what is their lobby power and all these kind of, what are the tactics. So that's for another webinar. We want to focus really here on the export ban. Yeah, well, maybe to really finalize with the question of Jennifer and how can we contribute as journalists to reporting from the effects of these banned pesticides in the global south. Well, as I said, we are connected to a large number of NGOs in the global south that are doing a lot of work in often very difficult circumstances, because I remember talking to a woman from Guatemala who visited Brussels from a very small NGO who really talked about intimidation by local plantation owners, intimidation by their political friends, their local or regional political friends, really a climate of repression where people are afraid to speak out. And she was working on herself on a plantation, a fruit plantation that was certified by an international certifier. And she said, well, what happens is when the controllers come, everybody puts on their boots and their gloves and they are so-called protected. But as soon as the inspectors had left, everybody took off again, because it's not doable to work with these stuffs and considering the kind of intense production work that they need to do. So this is so my answer is, well, if you want to do research, there's a lot of interesting files. There is a lot of stuff going on in a country like Kenya, in other African countries, in Asian countries, in Brazil. There has been a lot of reporting already. But I mean, I would say, if you want to do really meaningful and important reporting, and I really encourage journalists to do so, there is a lot of allies and a lot of knowledge on the ground in many countries. So it's basically, yeah, we are happy to help with that and to put you in touch with such organizations and researchers. So there's a lot of work to be done, actually. So I don't know if there's anyone who would like to ask a question via the microphone, or Joao, you want to come in?
Yes, I wouldn't add a lot more to what you said. Just that also there was a huge shift in the political scenario from 2019, 2020. There were these big protests out in the streets demanding action on climate and environmental issues, and this all also died out with COVID, and then with the war in Ukraine, and then the war in Palestine. So and there was a general shift towards the right, and a lot of these issues have been reinterpreted. Well, not only chemicals, but environmental issues, climate issues, agriculture issues, they've all been reinterpreted as culture wars. And this has become a major trend in which all of politics has shifted towards the right. And so also something that Hans touched a bit before. The farmers' protests are very complex, but the lobby machine and the comms machine that was set in place was very much similar to what happened with the Yellow Vests in France in 2018. So there was a reinterpretation. I think also in France, there's a huge clash between the farmers amongst themselves, as many of them refuse to be represented by big landowners speaking on TV or Copa Cogeca representatives saying they speak for. We see this very clearly here in Brussels. If you go to the protests in which Via Campesina is saying one thing, and then the interviews are mostly headed towards Copa Cogeca, and they're saying like almost diametrically opposed. They have diametrically opposed demands, focusing on the need for farmers to have a living wage, to not be pushed into free trade agreements, and a lot of them also wanting to be protected from chemicals in their daily life. So I think the issue with the farmers' protests is a bit shows the firepower and the communicational power that has been set in place. That they were caught offhand in the beginning when the Green New Deal, the Farm to Fork, and all of those proposals came, but they bided their time and then set all their cards, waiting for the right moment. And I think this final moment of the farmers' protest was actually they just jumped on it and have been making the best of it and getting governments and the Commission to sponge out everything that they didn't want. Okay, let's finish the presentation part, and then we'll where is it now? And then yeah,
I would like, Jennifer, on your question, I would really appreciate if you could kick over an email to us, specifically on your question on Nigeria, and we'll see which. I mean, I don't know them all by heart, obviously, because there's hundreds of them, but we'll see which organization we can put you in touch with. I was speaking earlier about the joint statement that we published with all those organizations in December 2022, and the visit to the Commission and the petition with all the signatures. Also that day we organized a small conference of a half day, and the video of that you can find on our website. And if I'm not mistaken, there was also a testimony from someone from Nigeria there. But again, I will send you those links if you send an email. Yeah.
Okay, so proceeding, our report is coming out publicly probably on the 22nd of April, but we would be happy to provide you with an embargo version 10 days before that. The previous presentation I did was more about the report that's coming out on the 17th, the Le Basique report made by the coalition, which is also possible to get an embargo version before. Ours will focus, as is our costume, our usual way of operating, on the lobbying arguments and the lobbying apparatus that was set in place to get this outcome. I would focus mostly on 5 key arguments that were raised. Some of them we've talked about already. The whole Le Basique report very much focuses on dismantling one of these arguments. But the first one that they said it would be illegal to do an export ban because it would directly collide with the World Trade Organization rules. We actually we commissioned a report from a constitutional international professor from the University of The Hague, which very clearly outlined that there is no incompatibility in this ban. This ban would perfectly be justifiable as there's objectives that make it legal in terms of the GATT and WTO rules, namely that it falls in the protection of public morals, in the protection of human, animal, or plant life or health, and the conservation of exhaustible natural resources, all of which fall within the any form of export ban that would be applied. The link that I shared now is the whole legal opinion, which is not just shown. It's not just one small paragraph. It's many pages, but you can consult it. It's been public for some months. We published it in the end of November and presented it in the European Parliament. The other is that if the EU bans these exports, third countries will source them, which doesn't make a lot of sense because the EU is the biggest producer of the chemicals. So if it forbade this production or export, it would be very difficult to have a huge shift, especially because these are old molecules. They're not very effective in many cases. They are like end-of-the-line products. And so the reality is banning their export and their production would actually fuel alternatives, in safe alternatives, we would hope, to come into effect and to substitute them with something which would not be something that we know for sure that are dangerous products for people and for the environment. It's also, it denies the reality that there's this shift in there, that world is a complex place in which there are different dynamics in place, and it's based on the assumption that countries can simply say no to some products, which in many cases it's not real, because in many countries there is no legislation that can actually protect people because it wasn't set in motion, or because very often the same companies which are producing these products have heavily lobbied the countries into not having protective legislation. And when there's political changes, they further push this. For example, the case of BASF or Bayer in Brazil under the Bolsonaro presidency, in which the number of chemicals opened up for import was just massive, and there were some rules, but it was complete free for all during 4 years, in which it massively exploded the number. This is also another report we're pushing out soon, more on Bayer, which will feature this. The third argument would be that it will harm agricultural producers in third countries, which is a bit laughable, considering that these products unquestionably harm agricultural producers in the third countries. And I go to the Center of Pesticide Suicide Prevention from the University of Edinburgh, that actually says that countries that have implemented bans show that lives are saved and the impact on agriculture is very low. That is, there is a substitution of the products either by shifts in the methods of production or by other products which are not dangerous. Most pesticides in lower to middle income countries are imported. So this includes pesticides banned for use within the EU, and it becomes ridiculous because we want to protect farmers and consumers in Europe. We also want to protect farmers and consumers outside of Europe. And we know these products end up also, a lot of them coming back to Europe. So obviously it's very clearly the notion that there is no alternative to the agrochemical, highly intensive energy model of agriculture, which is in itself a big problem, not only for pesticide use, but also for other intensive uses of land, labor, and degradation, and emissions, etc. Also, there's no research that directly links the need to use banned pesticides to promote food security in any country. So lack of food security, they may try to push their agenda that these banned pesticides are essential for food security. It's clearly not an issue, the access to these banned pesticides, which, as we have said, they're old molecules, some of them very highly ineffective in the effects that they purport to do. And there are less toxic alternatives available for agricultural production. Then there's the one which we already tackled in Le Basique, and a EU export ban would lead to economic and job losses. So the numbers are laughable. This report will come out on the 17th. We can provide it to you probably a week before that. And something that Hans already touched in, that a global approach and voluntary schemes are better than a legally binding EU export ban. That is, once again, that the industry should self-regulate and at the international level have these very broad, good intention guided agreements. And a lot of the reports from the UN special rapporteurs focus exactly on that. That the voluntary nature of these instruments limits their effectiveness, that the industry has obstructed reforms and paralyzed global pesticide restrictions globally, and like what Hans was focusing on, that there needs to be a complete unanimity to reach banning of specific products, and that the very conventions themselves are very much business focused, which is in itself a problem. There's then another vast array of arguments. Like there's one very specific argument raised by the seed industries, here represented by Euroseeds and ECHA, but it's Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta. So in the shadows, there's the main operators, which sometimes lobby directly, but the main arguments are put forward by CropLife, by Cefic, by VBI in Germany, also by Federchimica in Italy, and then to a lower, the seeds ones, and to a lower level Plastics Europe, although they sometimes come into meetings and push the entire agenda if there's any pressing need to tackle an issue like the export ban. Other actors may come into play, like Business Europe, but these have all been involved. Euroseeds puts forward the notion that they should be allowed to cover their seeds with banned chemicals, because otherwise they will be sent to the countries, and then they will cover the seeds without protective gear, and so that we're actually doing them a favor by sending these banned the seeds already with banned products there. And yeah, I'd say like this.
Yeah, thank you, Joao. Yeah, indeed, the last, if I may come in and directly to the last point, this famous coating of seeds by companies like Syngenta, they really brag about the fact that the coating of the way they do the coating with neonics mainly is much more professional and advanced than people or companies would do in the global south. So it's also quite of a Eurocentric, arrogant argument, but to brag about the fact that you coat your seeds with a highly toxic product which is banned by EU regulators is quite of a interesting point of view. But anyhow, it's the kind of arguments that they do use in the public consultation. I just would like to highlight, if I may, a very concrete point also on this path that apparently the Commission is considering now, is this international regulation, and very specifically, so once a year all the parties of the Rotterdam Convention come together in a meeting to discuss the progress and to discuss possible amendments, etc. And last year there was a proposal put on the table by a handful of countries, 1 or 2 Europeans and a few African countries, if I'm not mistaken, basically suggesting a way out of this stalemate where, if as I explained before, if there's no unanimity, then you can't basically move on. So the proposal was, put in simple words, to create a new annex, Annex 8, and to put a new product on that list only would require 75% of the votes of all the parties up to the Rotterdam Convention. Now, given the fact that the European Union the Commission and several policymakers are considering this avenue, and you would assume that the European Union would support such a proposal, but that was not the case. And they basically put forward their own proposal, and so the end of the story was that this reform proposal, which is, it's not radical, it's not revolutionary, but at least it would help to progress a bit the situation and to get out of the blockage that basically is often the case. And I would invite journalists to ask the European Commission. Well, I'm not really sure that you will get a very insightful answer, but nevertheless, I think it would be very, very helpful if there would be research into the reasons why and how the European Commission and the member states didn't fully support this proposal. And that was just in May last year. And then I see a question in the chat from Zoe. And Joao, I don't know if you have seen it, but it's more your cup of tea because it's on the link with the Paris Agreement and toxic emissions, killing natural carbon sinks, peatland, wetlands. To be honest, it's not my cup of tea, and I wouldn't have an answer. It's a very important and relevant question, Zoe, but I'm afraid that I have to pass this one now. I would not know.
Never found this argument anywhere. Doesn't mean we are limited in our research capability, obviously, but in the access to information, the lobby facts, the lobby register, and the public consultations that were searched for, they never raised that. But I wouldn't put it past them, of course.
It was just from my experience working with EFSA, ECHA, the European Health Agency, there's a great interlinkage into sort of the One Health approach. And I know the Greens in the Parliament at the moment are looking to exit the Energy Charter Treaty, which is really notorious for fossil fuel companies. And basically a lot of countries are locked into it. but they're able to challenge this on the basis of the Paris Agreement. And a lot of pesticides, the residue goes into the wetland areas, into the water tables, you know, and kills non-target organisms. So it's all part of this sort of One Health. So I think, you know, it's always a shot to underline, you know, we've all signed up to the Paris Agreement. That is a legally binding treaty. So, you know, that we need to seriously, it would seriously strengthen our position, in my opinion. So I just would thought throw my 10 cents in.
They usually only use this to say that they need to deregulate new GMOs because it would then reduce the use of pesticides, which has never happened. But towards the export ban, no one has raised it that I found out.
Thanks.
But it's it's interesting. I would maybe suggest to look into Exxon, because as part of the very powerful players in the toxic lobby, as we call it, Exxon is a very important one. I mean, people always think about fossil fuels when it comes to Exxon, but they're also very active in the chemical production and are very active in lobbying as well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you have ecosystems that are depleted and are being destroyed because of excessive pesticide use, then obviously it will have an impact also in carbon sinks in soils. I think that's.
Yes.
I guess. There's probably quite some academics also looking into this. But as Joao said, we haven't come across the arguments so far. So yeah. Yeah, any other question? Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much, first of all. I have a question. I hope it doesn't take us too far, but because the story I'm working on with an Indonesian colleague is focusing on paraquat specifically, which has been currently mostly exported from the UK. So we are trying to wonder, and we are trying to understand if there is any study yet about the impact of Brexit. And I mean, the question would be, I mean, even if Europe is moving towards like an export ban, what will happen with companies like Syngenta that have like a main factory in the UK, and if there is any risk, or if anyone has looked into the option of some other like European companies moving the production to the UK to be able to keep exporting banned pesticides.
Yeah, that's a very good question. An interesting research you're doing. Well, I mean, a bit cynical remark to start with is that the fact that the UK has left the EU should normally make it more easy to have kind of legislation like export bans. Because as you know, the UK often was really a dominant, very powerful player in the free trade and deregulation policies and politics. It's hard to tell. It might be possible that they would move part of the production. However, you know, companies like Syngenta, Syngenta is originally, as you know, probably Swiss, but is now fully owned by the Chinese government. It has merged a few years ago, and so if we're talking production, I mean, I guess these kind of global corporates, they can, if they think there's still a business model important enough in paraquat, then they can shift it to many different production sites, I would assume. But my estimated guess is that paraquat is so toxic and so dangerous and so in so many parts of the world being banned that I would be surprised. And as I said before, Syngenta being attacked in court in the US on the paraquat, I would be surprised if they would really take the effort to move production. But then again, yeah, it is definitely an option, obviously. I would not rule it out either, as the cynicism of these kind of companies is without any limits. Zoe, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I have quite a lot of experience with regards to Brexit. That's how I started working with the European Parliament. And being from Scotland, I mean, really the UK population and the people that voted for Brexit were sold a pup. I mean, it was a complete con trick. And, you know, there was allegations of Russian interference within the whole campaign. You know, the campaign was found to be illegal. And the whole process was to deregulate away from high European standards. So we really worry, and we have farmers in the UK that were on Downing Street just last week, basically because the UK government are signing trade agreements for lower standard food that the UK farmers will need to drop their standards. So it's a race to the bottom, really. So there is every chance that anything banned in Europe, the UK government could say, oh, well, here's a new opportunity for our economy. It's that bad. So I just thought I'd add that to the lady that asked about Brexit.
Yeah, thanks for that addition. I just a few days ago came across a very interesting aspect of the importance of trade agreements, indeed. Whereas the Mexican government basically announced a year ago that they would no longer allow the importation of GMO corn, which, as you know, is a very important staple food for Mexicans culturally, and also to stop the importation of glyphosate and foods with glyphosate residues in corn, which is a huge crop in the US. And as you know, as Joao mentioned, the use of pesticides has risen dramatically with the introduction of GM crops, being corn, soy, and others. And what happened? Well, very recently, then the US government basically said, well, dear Mexican government, you might well say so, but you have signed a free trade agreement with us, which is NAFTA, the US, Canada, and Mexico. So you don't have the right to impose such an export import ban for GM corn and glyphosate. And just last week, I think it's very recent. The Mexican government basically said, well, the arguments for the US to say so are bogus, because the US said you have no scientific basis for such a ban. And basically the Mexican government is fighting back and saying, well, here you have I think it's a 120-page report showing all the scientific underpinnings for banning GM corn and glyphosate. And it's very interesting. It's really sort of sublimation of war. You know, in the past, the countries would wage war on these kind of trade issues, and now it's going via WTO and trade agreements. So it's super fascinating to watch that evolve. Okay. I see we are, well, where you are, it's 4:25. This webinar was supposed to last for 1.5 hours.
Yeah, well, I think
I don't know.
a couple of more questions, if there are any.
Yes.
And if not, then we could just, reach the end of the session. And thank you so much for providing us all the insights. I think it was very helpful, and I wish the best of luck with the research and the best of luck to the journalists carrying on with their investigations. And I hope, Finn, that will reveal a lot of things and spark some discussion further, and that in turn, could be used by NGOs and brought to the attention of the Commission, maybe. So thank you very much. Yes, I remind everyone that you can also get in touch with us at the Earth Investigations program if you have more ideas or want to apply for new grants. Thank you so much. Please do join the webinar in May, indeed, with the Corporate Europe Observatory on lobby tactics of corporations. I think there will be a lot of useful information as well, and that is not so easy to find otherwise. And I wish you all a very nice end of the day, and thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye bye. Thanks.